Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll find out whether David Waldman is really here. Let's check my levels, and I'll be looking for a thumbs up from everybody. Everything re-engineered last night, hopefully in ways that work and that you can hear. Wouldn't that be terrific? We are all hoping for that. Justice says the vocal levels are 5 by 5. That's good news. I understand we still have a little bit of an echo on the music. And fingers crossed for eliminating the echo on the voice. We do have Greg Dworkin probably standing by, as a matter of fact. We're going to give a shot at bringing him in via a completely different voice-over IP protocol, I believe would be the... Well, it's an app, really. I mean, I don't know, is that... Protocol sounds like a fancy word for app in this instance, but I probably have it wrong. We're going to try and use what my kids use for their gaming, Discord. So we can also play video games while we're giving you the news. So that is good news. We gave it a little test this morning. There was a little bit of an echo in my voice that I detected in my own headphones, and which did, in fact, come across a little bit on the tape this time, which is a new twist on things. So this time I've, after, about, 3 hours of experimentation with Tom last night trying to engineer a solution, we came up with this patch. We almost abandoned everything and got rid of the whole thing and said, you're going to have to listen to a rerun, and Rochester, you're screwed for the station identification breaks. I don't know what else to do. But we re-engineered a sound tree, for lack of a better term. It's what Audio Hijack calls sessions, but that doesn't really help clarify things for me in any way. Anyhow, we re-engineered, built a new one from the ground up. The new computer is on its way. We just have to wait for it to come in. There's some possibility that additional memory might help things, according to the text that Greg checked with. So fingers crossed. Don't know whether the echo is going to be gone, but by the time Tom and I stopped working on things last night, it's the weirdest story you ever heard. The echo got worse every time we tried something new, until we finally reached the conclusion that perhaps the echo was almost like the ghosts of previous Skype sessions that never closed. So it may be that eventually Discord suffers from the same problem, but hopefully not before we can either A, find a different voice-over IP app and just abandon Discord and move to that, and or to get that mini Mac Mini up and running, and hope that the additional RAM and additional processor speed eliminates what might be the problem that Greg's tech was guessing. He's not an audio guy, but he's just a general IT tech, and says, maybe when you're dealing with these sorts of audio issues, you've got to, someone is uploading audio essentially, and if there's a delay in processing it, that comes across as an echo. So I don't know. We got our fingers crossed. Sounds like my sound is okay. We'll see how Greg does. And as a matter of fact, I think our new protocol basically is leaving an open chat room. So when Greg walks in, he's just there. I don't even know when he's calling anymore. He just says, I'm here. Like maybe now.
How's my sound?
Okay. Well, to me, it sounds pretty good. Let me hear you again. Uh-oh.
Can you hear it?
I do hear it. Do you hear me? Do you not hear me? Okay. Well, that's an issue. Well, let's see. How can I, hold on a second, Greg. Wait a second.
Okay. I'm going to try it again.
Okay. Wait, hold on. Don't run away.
Yeah, there's a bit of a delay.
Go. How about that, Greg? Did that help things? Still an echo on Greg, I'm told, from Justice, but now I don't know whether he can hear me or not. He's left our voice channel. I had my mute button. How about this, Greg? Can you hear me? I hear you. Let's see. You're not hearing me, Greg? Uh-oh, that's not good news. Let's see. What other buttons can I press? If my kids were here, they could make this work, you see.
Well, interestingly, I'm hearing you twice.
Oh, that's not as good. Oh, let me give that some thought. How about I don't say anything, and you do? Maybe not. Well, typing me a message. Let me see if I mute myself for now. All right.
Okay, and so what's happening is as we're using this, there's a delay, and I'm going to see if I can just go with the stories, which David will read.
Okay. Well, we'll try that. Did everybody hear that? All right, Greg. Well, it doesn't seem to be working as well as we had hoped. Okay. I've got Greg's stories, and well, we'll just have to run through them that way. I thought we had a solution, and I'm going to take a second look at what, if anything, we changed. I'm coming across twice. Let's see. Oh, I got one more. No, I don't know. So maybe I could be coming across 4 times now. I've pressed another button that might change things, but perhaps not. At any rate, if it doesn't change anything, I'll turn it off because it sounds awfully echoey for me. I'm betting that that's echoing for everybody. All right. Well, that was too bad. I thought we really had a solution here, and it's hard to tell. And looks like the delay can't be eliminated with Discord, and it may not be able to eliminate it at all. We have the damnedest problem here. Too bad. All right. Well, okay. So my echo is now coming across in everybody else's delay. We got rid of it. Don't worry. It goes away. Oh, well, you would know that by now by the time you hear this. Okay. So what do we have here from Greg? Right up at the top here, I can go all the way to the beginning because we've never used Discord before. It does say up at the top, for those of you who are gamers and use Discord, that Dem from Connecticut has joined the server and it's super effective. But apparently it's not. However, it is effective at getting us the stories, though Skype could have done that for us. That's true. All right. Let's see. Well, I apologize for the disruption, but that's what it's all about. Oh, I just made $1 billion. I forgot. I disrupted everything, and now everything's. I'm rich. You can't hear me, but I'm rich. All right. What do we got for Thursday? There's a Storify here to begin with from ProPublica on the Red Cross and donating. That sounds like it's probably pretty important because there's a big natural disaster underway, and one of them is in the White House, and one of them is in Houston, Texas. And by the way, we have heard that I missed this part yesterday. I missed this part of yesterday, trying to fix this whole thing. Apparently, Trump tweeted that he was trying to be sympathetic to the victims of the Texas hurricane and flooding, and saying that he's now having seen the devastation firsthand. I don't know whether he truly is supposed to understand it more or whatever, but the claim was that he had seen the devastation firsthand, and it turns out he did not. And the clarification from the White House apparently was, well, he firsthand heard stories about it, essentially, which is, of course, not firsthand, but I don't know. Among the many sins he has racked up, I suppose that's one of the least, but it's just another interesting entry in the annals of Donald Trump, presidential idiot. Okay, so what's this ProPublica tweet storm about that Greg has put together in a Storify for us? ProPublica begins, number 1 here, with Harvey has devastated Texas. In time of devastation, people give to disaster relief. And so let's talk about the Red Cross for a second. Sounds like a good idea. Number 2, you maybe saw the Barack Obama tweet telling people to give to the Red Cross. The tweet is linked here. I did not see it, so I guess we'll take a look at it. But I'm guessing it comes from Barack Obama and says that you should give to the Red Cross. But it says so much more eloquently. Thank you to all the first responders and people helping each other out. That's what we do as Americans. Here's one way you can help now. And embedded in Barack Obama's tweet is a tweet from the American Red Cross. Help those affected by Hurricane Harvey. Visit redcross.org. Call 1-800-RED-CROSS or text Harvey to, you know how that goes, 9999. It's 90999 to make a $10 donation in case the end of this tweet storm is that you should do such a thing. Then, technically speaking, you will be prepared to take care of that. So ProPublica continues from there. However, and there's a big however here, Washington Post reported that folks are urging people to donate for Harvey relief, just not to the Red Cross. This according to a story here in Embedded at the Washington Post, which appears to be titled, People are urging donations for Harvey relief efforts, just not to the Red Cross. That's a good title. Next tweet here includes a card here from ProPublica. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but the Red Cross, they couldn't get anything done. That is a quote from Harris County Judge Ed Emmett, upon which ProPublica comments, things haven't been going too well for the charity so far. And I guess maybe this Houston Chronicle link is perhaps a link to where that quote came from. This is not a shock to us, says ProPublica. Why? Let's go through this all again. Or once for people like me who missed it the first time. A few years ago, we started looking into how millions in Sandy donations were spent. Sandy, yes, they wouldn't tell us. That's the ProPublica story. It's linked here. Red Cross, how we spent Sandy money is a, quote, trade secret. Oh my, that's not a good answer. Number 7 in our tweet storm, we kept reporting and got here. The Red Cross botched its response to Superstorm Sandy and put PR over victims. That does tend to happen from time to time. After Superstorm Sandy, I'm having difficulty saying that too. It sounds like Superstorm Sandy, which there's no T in it at all, except for the storm part has one. After Superstorm Sandy, Americans opened their wallets to the Red Cross. They trusted the charity and believed it was up to the job. That under the headline of The Red Cross's Secret Disaster, a ProPublica piece embedded in here. When was that written, in case you'd like to look it up? I suppose it's probably the only one in which they called the Red Cross a secret disaster, but it's dated October 29th, 2014. Hurricane season, of course. ProPublica continues here. 8 months later, we reported that the Red Cross raised $500 million for Haiti and built 6 homes. Just 6. That reported under the headline, How the Red Cross Raised $500 million for Haiti and, I'll bet, built just 6 homes. Then it failed in Louisiana. Red Cross failed for 12 days after historic Louisiana floods is the ProPublica piece embedded here. And then number 10 in our tweet storm. Then it stumbled in Mississippi. After Mississippi flooding, Red Cross stumbles again. They love the stumbles in their headlines. Number 11 here. Red Cross has also serially misled donors on how much money goes to disaster relief. It's not 91 cents per dollar. And here, another ProPublica piece. The Red Cross CEO has been serially misleading, yada yada, but illustrated with a 91% and an asterisk. Number 12 in our tweet storm, a government investigation started looking into the charity's disaster response / oversight. Its CEO tried to spike it. That also not going to go over very well at ProPublica. The headline there gives away the name. Red Cross CEO Gail McGovern tried to kill government investigation. Let's see, number 13. Then a blistering Senate report said the Red Cross CEO made false statements to Congress. Yow. Even internally, our 14th tweet here, even internally, trust appears to be an issue. Only 35% of employees said they trust Red Cross leadership. Wow. And now, Harvey has dumped trillions of gallons of water on Houston, and the Red Cross may be stumbling again. This time with the headline, Shelters Overwhelmed by the Number of Harvey Victims Seeking, what? Seeking, this time the headline has simply been shorted to overwhelmed by the numbers of Harvey victims. Thanks a lot for misleading me there. Aha, see, it's ProPublica that's doing this misleading. It looks like there's more to the headline in the embedded tweet. Okay, I'll just stick to the text of their tweets. So ProPublica says, we're on it, but also need your help. In response to Harvey, how's the Red Cross doing? Do you have any tips? Email redcross@propublica.org. They've got their own email address set up for this thing. Finally, if you're looking to donate to disaster relief, read this first. And it is a ProPublica piece, not surprisingly, entitled 5 Tips for Donating After Disasters. I guess we should read that now and give you an idea of what you're supposed to be doing according to the piece here. Let me see. By the way, I have to check in on comments and see whether we have any echo continuing. I think there was a note from Greg here down at the bottom, but I think we have repaired the issue according to Justice with our echo. Finally, okay. It's tough trying to wing this at the same time as engineering like 3 different computers, not a single one of which can make this work properly. All right. Let's find out what we are supposed to do about donations according to ProPublica. And I'm hopeful that they're not insisting that you give all their money to them, because that would just be wrong. All right. I mean, it's nice to donate to ProPublica, but not for disaster relief. Unless you think their coverage is a disaster, in which case, go for it. But I don't have time for these semantic games. There's engineering to do here. Okay. Thank you. Bill reporting everything sounds fine. That at least helps us have confidence in that. By the way, maybe before we launch into ProPublica's piece, we can check in on some of the other comments that Pete B2, let's see, says he's sending us, not sure if you have the Open Markets /New Century /Google story already, but here you go just in case. Guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Yesterday, just to complicate things more, I'm going to pat myself on the back using an application I've never used before, and I'll see whether it works. But we did. That's a great example. I don't think we got out ahead of the news, because once again, we were reading mainstream traditional media reported news, but that story blew up online in social media yesterday afternoon in reaction to the story that we read, of course. But I think we prepared you well for the day. Good eye is what we'll say on that one. Just like when you were in Little League and you decided not to take a pitch and it would, good eye, kid. It's sort of a throwaway bit of praise there. But I think we spotted that one early and shared it with everybody. And those who had listened to the show were up on the news by the time Matt Stoller, who is apparently one of the fellows at New Century's Open Markets Project, got around to expressing his opinions and insights on all of this stuff. So I don't know. I thought we did pretty well in spotting that one. Pete, we already got it. Listen to yesterday's show. Thanks for the contribution. Good eye on you for recognizing that as the kind of story that definitely belonged on the show. It's just that I saw it yesterday too, so I did it. But it was really that's a good spot. Now you know we're doing a good job here if the audience is spotting the right kind of stuff. I don't automatically just read anything that gets sent. I take a lot of suggestions and I change the direction of the show from time to time. But I'm particularly impressed when we hit on something like this and everybody says, yes, that should have been a story. Okay. Let's see. By the way, along the way, Michael Musson saying, hopefully senators won't vote against the Harvey bill because it contains spending unrelated to Sandy. That could be the excuse that Ted Cruz uses this time around, too. Okay. Let's see. Back to ProPublica and their 5 tips for donating after disasters. And this has been something of a disaster. So maybe it's a good time for you to donate to the show. Don't donate to the Red Cross. I mean, you might still be interested in doing something like that, but donating to the show, again, will help relieve some of this disaster, I think. But hang on. Don't do it yet. Let me make sure that the new computer actually makes a difference, and then there will be something to donate about. And then you'll know that those of you who have already donated, your donations have gone into finding a solution that really works. One of these days I'll explain the entirety of the delay for getting that new computer in here, but those delays are over. We can't work without it anymore. Okay, ProPublica and their 5 tips for donating after disasters. After our investigation of the Red Cross's work in Haiti, readers have repeatedly asked us for tips on giving. Here are a few modest answers. Modest meaning not us, I guess. Okay, so ignore what I said. Earlier this month, we published an investigation with NPR into the American Red Cross's failures in Haiti. We've gotten a lot of questions from readers, including on Reddit, wondering what to do next time a big disaster hits. And by the way, this is an old piece. This is a June 2015 piece, which I guess they endorse by retweeting it, and they stand by their conclusions at this point. So, what should you do if you want to help? To whom should you send money? There's no simple answer. God damn it. Why did I read this if there's no simple answer? All right. Nuance. Fine. There is no one-stop shop that can answer those questions, but if you're willing to put a bit of time in on this, you can be a more informed donor and increase the chances that your money will reach those in need. Well, I think I knew that. Tell me more. Here are a few tips based on conversations with experts and reporting in Haiti. Research before you give. Take the time and read up on your group. This can be as simple as a few Google searches and checking out information compiled by various charity watchdogs. Have there been any issues in the past with management? Has the group performed well in the past? Has it had problems? The answers to these questions can inform your choices. I gotta tell you, that's kind of a disappointing start to this piece. Am I wasting my time here? Am I going to read you a piece that says not where to go with your money, but how to do your own research to decide for yourself where to go with your own money? Because I could just tell you that now. Let me see what the headlines of the sections are. Research before you give. I don't want to say duh, but, duh. I don't know. You guys are smart. For you, it's duh. For everybody else, maybe not. If you do give, you can demand meaningful transparency. Okay. Well, that's good. Can you? In fact, let's read about that. Nonprofit organizations are generally required to make only broad disclosures about their finances. The American Red Cross's annual tax return, for example, doesn't reveal anything at all about its Haiti program. But as a donor, you can ask the organization you're giving to make public detailed disclosures about their spending. Okay. How? As Haiti aid expert Jake Johnston pointed out in our Reddit AMA discussion, you remember those Ask Me Anything discussions, you can also ask elected officials to exercise their own oversight of charities that raise money after disasters. And I'm afraid we've come to another duh on this section. I mean, if they don't make disclosures, here's a helpful hint. You could ask them to make that disclosure. Yeah, you can. But again, I think I knew that, right? Could you disclose? Yeah, I'm not going to do that. Oh, well. In that case, I'm going to write to my member of Congress and ask them to exercise oversight over you. Okay. They might and they might not. Okay. Local groups or those that have deep local ties can be the best option. That's the next section. And I think that's also somewhat intuitive, but I'm glad that they remind everybody. One issue came up again and again in our Haiti reporting is that the American Red Cross did not have a significant amount of experience in working in Haiti, hindering its efforts to operate in the country. We also heard about groups, some large, some small, that had been in the country for decades and employed Haitians in top positions. They tended to be more successful. Okay, fair enough. I think the lesson here is if you want to donate for relief in Houston, look for organizations with a long presence and history on the ground in Houston. Next up, there are options beyond traditional charities. While the idea remains the subject of much debate, some in the aid world are now advocating simply giving money to those in need, which I think qualifies for its own special level of duh. in that, I mean, we were looking for charities to pool those resources, but that, I don't know, I mean, we give money to people in need. Okay. I mean, it's good and all, and people have gotten away from doing that in favor of giving it to, the rest of this, to these other organizations, but I don't know. All right. Let me move on. Is there anything redeeming in this last section? Think beyond the next disaster. That sounds like a good point. Jonathan Katz, a reporter who wrote the book on the troubled post-earthquake relief efforts in Haiti, argues that it's the time between disasters, when the most important work has to be done. From his book, he says, poverty and a lack of local institutions create the shoddy conditions that make disasters deadlier than they have to be. Supporting efforts to give aid directly to local governments and the goal of building local institutions that operate independently of foreign control will go exponentially further than cargo planes of tarps and bottled water. It's true that we don't always know what locals will do with that assistance, but that's the point. It's up to them. Okay. Well, fair enough. And, good answer as far as it goes, but, I don't know. The rest of you disappointed? It would have been a disservice, really, and I'm sure they would have left out some good people if they had simply said, well, here are 5 charities that you can give to in place of the American Red Cross. I don't know if that really would have helped things, but, I don't know. I feel like those 5 things were relatively intuitive, though maybe the last one was just to help you feel better about your inclination to give money away if you were worried about it. All right, well, we'll take our first station break right now and try again after this. And welcome back to the shattered remains of the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio, which continues running strong. Fortunately, the problem, I guess, is isolated to our own setup and not something general to Netroots Radio, because then you'd really be lost for the day. Thanks for everybody's patience. I guess our experiment with Discord at least proves that there's nothing in particular that we're doing wrong with Skype. I don't know whether this helps us diagnose our problems or not. But next step, obviously, is migrating to the new computer and seeing whether any extra processing power helps with things. Time now to catch up, not only with the rest of the stories that Greg has provided to us, but with a couple of comments, additional comments that have come in since via Twitter. Pete tells us, no, it wasn't that he was behind on listening to the show, but rather that there is a new entry, a new chapter in the story of the New America Foundation, which no doubt means that Pete is entirely satisfied with our coverage to date and simply wants to keep our standards high. I think that's what it's supposed to mean. What's happening here? Matt Stoller, well, I'll let you guess. What do you think happened? There's a story in the news that involved overwhelming corporate influence affecting his work, and he's upset about it. So what do you think happened next? Yes, that's right. Matt Stoller wrote an article about it, and it's at the HuffPost, and here it is. Citizens Against Monopoly. That's their best line. They're going with it. This is his, I guess, his take on the story and what happened. Google got me and my colleagues kicked out of a prominent Washington think tank. Here's why that matters. There's a number of reasons why it matters. Here's why it matters to Matt Stoller. One of the other things that matters is that Matt Stoller was in a prominent Washington think tank. And there are lots of people who think that that matters for very different reasons, some of which might even be diametrically opposed to one another. Matt's an interesting and sometimes divisive figure even among those of us on the left. But I think the story he's going to be telling here is largely the one with which we were sympathetic yesterday. And even if it isn't, who cares? It's an important story, and we'll follow up on it with this. It's been more than 70 years since we've seen a broad-based citizens movement against the power of monopoly. It's long past time for one, And the following story is why. I'm sure it's at least one reason why. In late June, the European Competition Authority handed down a decision against Google for monopolizing the search market and suppressing rivals. It was a classic case of anti-competitive behavior, and the EU made the right decision. What's interesting, however, is not the decision, but what happened next across the ocean in Washington, D.C. It wasn't the ocean's fault. It's just happened to be in the way. My group, the Open Markets Program at New America, researches and studies monopoly power. Barry Lynn began this research 15 years ago and has been building the necessary intellectual and historical grammar to understand the deep dysfunction in our corporate and political sectors. In response to the EU decision, Lynn sent a statement lauding the action. In response, Google had our group kicked out of our parent think tank, New America. Ken Vogel at the New York Times did the story on the specifics of how this happened. We read that one. The combination of the misbehavior in the search market and the attempt to suppress research into how Google operates shows that the actual issue at hand is one of political power. This moment matters. It matters because it shows that monopoly power and Google itself is a threat to the free flow of ideas upon which our democracy depends. It matters because it proves that if we do not stand up to monopolists, they will keep our public institutions quiet about their growing power. And it matters most of all because it shows that we can reclaim our democracy if we try. At Open Markets, we obviously do not like the attempt at undermining our work, but on another level, we see this as a backhanded compliment by Google on how effective our work has actually been. After all, if we are worth silencing, then our words and research carries power. Yes, true, but of course that's not the metric I would recommend using. It's a useful one, or rather a useful message to take from an inconvenient metric that's been forced upon you. But obviously you don't want to set yourself up that way. But no, there's more to comment about that. Perhaps we'll wait until the end to discuss. I'm serious about that, by the way. Monopoly is a political problem. It's time to stand up for our rights. It's time to say enough. And as we've seen, when we do tell the truth, the monopolists cannot abide. Google's tactics will not work. Our organization, Open Markets, is going independent. And we are launching a campaign called Citizens Against Monopoly, where we will ask Google's CEO to stop this manipulation of our public commons. Join us. Both what Google did and what we are doing are part of a very old story. One might even say it's the oldest story in America. Okay, I get you. The British East Indies Company attempted to monopolize the tea trade, which helped spark the American Revolution. During debates over early governance in America, James Madison organized our government around the concept of separation of powers. Early American thinkers did not Early American thinkers did not confined to the purely governmental realm. What does that mean? I don't know. Thomas Jefferson in 1785, I'm going to have to blow past that, noted that legislators cannot invent too many devices for subdividing property. This was a political point about how to organize a democracy. As big business grew up in the late 19th century, antitrust rules were designed to bring this concept into the burgeoning industrial economy. Louis Brandeis, who formalized the 19th century anti-monopoly sentiment into a rigorous doctrine of political economy, called this industrial liberty, a parallel to political liberty. For decades now, we have been enthralled to a different tradition, one that airbrushes the politics out of our commercial sector. That is a good point, but that time is over. What Google did is not abnormal. They fund many nonprofits in D.C. Before Google dominated D.C., it was too big to fail banks, among others, who exerted political power. It's not hard to see the downside of that kind of political power. It is time for citizens in America and all over the world to stand up to the bullies in our society. It is time to look to the real governors and regulators in America and around the world, the monopolists, and demand our democracy stand against them. It is time for America to come home. Join us. Well, that is rousing, of course. I have some comment to make on that I withheld earlier. Let me kind of scroll back to where I was when these things occurred to me. I mean, all of these things are true. but these are also illustrative of a much broader phenomenon here. We'll say this. I mean, this doesn't diminish the message, and it doesn't diminish the importance of the moment. It doesn't diminish any of the points, maybe, that Matt made here, but they're true and ought to be observed nonetheless. I guess, where are we? Right up here. My group, the Open Markets Program at New America, researches and studies monopoly power. All true, right? Barry Lynn began the research 15 years ago. It's been building the necessary intellectual and historical grammar to understand the deep dysfunction in our corporate and political sectors. Okay, and all of this is good. In response to the EU decision, Lynn sent a statement lauding the action. That's natural. That's what you should expect from him given the work he's done, and it is good work. In response, Google had our group kicked out of our parent think tank, New America. That sounds pretty bad. And it is. It's rotten. We heard the story of how it happened. The combination then of the misbehavior in the search market and the attempt to suppress research into how Google operates shows that the actual issue at hand is one of political power. That's true. I guess what occurred to me here was how long, and again, I don't lay this at Matt's feet or any one individual's feet, really, but it does deserve some consideration. For how long did you operate the Open Markets Program at the New America Foundation, which all sounds fantastic, on the backs of donations like those from Google, and tell yourself it was all going to be okay? That's my basic criticism. I mean, and my basic question. I would do it too. Everything seems to be going well, right? And you're happy with the way things are operating. So what would be the sense in running away from a source of money, right? I mean, it happens to everybody. It happens to me too, I guess, right? I mean, I operate based on user and listener donations, and certainly when there's a problem or an issue or a question or a concern or somebody gets angry about what we do, or I mean, it hasn't really happened to date, but it's always in the back of my mind. What happens if something that I believe is absolutely true and necessary to say and explore angers the vast majority of people who've donated to the show? What do we do about that? And, that would be the same issue for the New America Foundation and open markets, etc. I'm sure as he goes on to say, well, we're going to go independent. Well, are you going to go independent? I mean, what does that even really mean, I guess, is the next question. He says we're going to go independent. That doesn't mean we're going to go unpaid. That means we're going to try and raise our own money from other sources, one of which will one day want you to change direction. They may swear now that they never will, just as Google once swore it wouldn't be evil. And then, I don't know, if this is evil, then it happened, right? So, I don't know. It seems to me that it's just sort of part of the game, and I don't know if it helps anybody, and it probably doesn't further your work necessarily to throw your hands up and say, be defeatist and say, no matter where we get our money from, this will all eventually happen again. But I do think it's worth noting at some point. I don't know. I mean, that's what occurred to me anyway in reading this. So right here, Google's tactics will not work. Our organization, Open Markets, is going independent, and we are launching a campaign called Citizens Against Monopoly, where we will ask Google's CEO to stop this manipulation of our public commons. And I guess that's necessary in that my first thought was, well, why would you make that your first campaign? If you're going independent, then forget about Google. But no, he's right. There's more going on here than just the funding. They are obviously going to try and make a habit of exercising this influence with other think tanks or other institutions that they fund, and probably institutions that they don't fund, just because Google is so ubiquitous, a part of our everyday lives that they think they can, and they might even be right, exercise that kind of power. And really the whole issue that was at the heart of this stuff, the manipulation of search engine results, is at the most basic level exactly that, an attempt to manipulate, if not policy directly, then certainly all of the most important building blocks of everything from public policy to the way you make personal decisions in your everyday life. That might not be what they think they're ultimately about. They're ultimately about making money. But of course they've obviously hit on the formula that they can make more money more quickly and more easily if they can sell people the guarantee that their information will become more readily available, or perhaps even be the sole source of information as far as web searchers are concerned. And that's very valuable to client companies, and they might be willing to sell that to them. So there's an enormous issue at stake, but we should also maybe go into it with a jaundiced eye. I don't know if there's any such thing as being totally independent. That you can certainly be more independent than relying entirely on Google. And Pete is saying a wide base of funders and donors who each give a tiny portion of the total amount of money means no worries about offending one of them. That's true. There's just worries about offending large numbers of them. And although if you do, then maybe that's a good indication that you're maybe barking up the wrong tree. It's certainly true. So, you certainly want to spread out a wide base, but it wasn't really entirely clear to me from yesterday's story that Google was so fundamental in its donations to the operation of the New America Foundation. It became clear to me that the New America Foundation CEO was very worried about the amount of money that came from Google, and maybe they failed in their mission of spreading out their base and not taking too much money from Google. But there was no information in the story except what we could infer from, is it Anne-Marie Slaughter, who was named as the CEO of New American Foundation? If I've got the name wrong, I apologize. But clearly the CEO was worried about it, but there wasn't any information that was reported on its own that confirmed, for me anyway, how much of their money, how much of their operating funds come from Google. We can guess that it was a large amount, and the amount is probably publicly available. That's true, and we could probably look it up, and maybe Pete, maybe you want to check on that. And I'm sure it was enough of a chunk that Anne-Marie Slaughter or whoever the CEO was justifiably worried. I don't know that she was justified in pursuing the outcome that they got, but being worried, that sounds like maybe it was a reasonable thing to do. You can react to your worry in any number of different ways. So I guess what they're trying to say here, or what Pete's trying to say anyway, is that he's hopeful that open markets won't make the same mistake. But I can tell you that they're subject to making the same mistake. That's just one of those things that comes along with the territory of getting paid. I mean, Matt Stoller gets paid to have his ideas and express them. And at a level that, for instance, I don't. But we do a different kind of work, and so that's to be expected. But, real independence brings a lot of instability and worry with it. And the temptation to alleviate that worry when it comes easily from a single source, and from a single source that at least at one point made its motto, don't be evil, and that the CEO of that organization who was giving up all that money seemed so clearly dedicated to your mission, which obviously would include intellectual and educational and academic independence, that it would be surprising for Google to do something like this. But eventually people do things like that. And sometimes they think they're right when they do it too. It's an important story. Matt has a lot to say about it. I'll be interested to see how Open Markets does. For the time being, I assume the money for an operation like Open Markets comes from liberal philanthropists, yes. And I suppose corporate institutions as well, and it'll be those corporate institutions that are at the moment in the disrupt stage. And when you get past the disrupt stage and become the market leader, the natural inclination, I think thanks to MBA culture in particular, is to begin trying to operate as a monopolist. And when that happens, part of what they do will probably be a reevaluation of the money that they give and how they use it. And to that extent, I think probably any of the serious scholars at open markets could probably have described the trajectory that Google took with their eyes closed. I mean, that's their job. They know very well that entities like Google are ultimately and possibly inevitably going to try to do things like this. I would be curious then to know, just, a minor criticism. This isn't the job of the people at open markets, but I would be curious to know whether at any point anybody at open markets, whether Barry Lynn or Matt Stoller for that matter, or anybody else, ever said, like, I don't know, does Barry Lynn did he sit on the board of the New America Foundation or some sort of advisory commission of sorts that as the head of the open markets program? Did he or anybody else who might have served such a role at any point ever say, I'm growing concerned by the amount of money that Google and in particular Google and the parent company Alphabet and what was the guy's name? Is it Eric Schmidt? Is that right? I don't know if I remember it correctly or not. That his personal foundation are giving to. We're meeting in a conference room named after him. This concerns me because as great a guy as he is sitting at the head of an organization that history and all of my own research tells me will almost inevitably attempt to exercise undue influence over the work we do here. And are we building in any protections for ourselves beyond the ability of the CEO to say, we need to spin this program off in order to avoid jeopardizing the rest of our work? And is that a legitimate thing to do? Is that a legitimate protection against the power of monopolists or not? I mean, if you basically are taking one of your programs and throwing them to the wolves, even if it's not such a dangerous thing to throw them to the wolves, because probably most, if not all, of the people involved in the new open markets program are, ironically enough, probably well versed in the grants markets and know very well where to seek funding, how to do it. Once you get your foot in the door of the grant-making world, the grant-making circles, you're kind of set forever. I mean, there are things you can do to blackball yourself and to make it difficult for you to start out independently. But the world of grant-making donors is a very different world than most of you and I actually live in. And it's a world of circulating and recirculating checks and galas and fundraisers and back scratching, and it works. It's great. Lots of money gets passed around. I resent it deeply, of course, and avoid it at all costs. But I mean, I don't know. Again, I guess I can just sum it up by saying, if anybody should have seen this coming, it should have been the open markets program guys. Not that it was anything that they could have avoided, because there is a certain amount of inevitability about it. But all right, let's connect it to the Red Cross story we read first. That's what we're famous for here, making overarching themes out of seemingly disconnected stories. The time in between disasters is when this work needs to be done. The open markets program should have been working all along on this problem and will now be forced to work on this problem. They are going to have to try and structure themselves such that they never get themselves in such a position, or that they have some sort of exit protocol when it happens. And my guess is that they won't do a great deal about it unless it's to take Pete's suggestion and simply say, we need to limit the amount of money that we take from any one source. And that will make it difficult for them to get themselves up and running, but ultimately might be worth their while. Of course, there will be some perverse economic ramifications from that, not just having less money, but that it will cost less money to every donor, every potential donor, to reach the maximum influence allowable inside of the open markets program if they go with something like some kind of a hard dollar cap. In other words, if they were to say, well, we won't take any more than $100,000 from any one source, which I don't know. I mean, that might be a lot, might be a little. To you and me, it sounds like an awful lot of money. In the grant making and foundation world, it's probably next to nothing, but maybe they can start off small. But if they declare that to be their cap, so no one donor can have that much more influence than anybody else, then you kind of get, it's a parallel to political donations. You become a maxed out donor at some point, and that just becomes shorthand for one of our biggest and most influential, and therefore somebody that really has to be listened to. Capping donations didn't really diminish influence in the political world, and I have my doubts about it diminishing influence in this part of the political world. It simply makes it more possible that you could have more people who think they're the boss very quickly. But I guess if you go into it with your eyes open and say, well, if we can replace that person's $100,000 very easily on the open grant making market, then we don't have to worry about it all that much. But then, of course, there becomes there arises the issue of becoming a problem child in the grant recipients community. You should realize before you sign on with these guys that they are habitually jettisoning donors in what they will call fits of pique, but you will call according to the demands. You were loosing donors, I guess, according to the demands of your principles. It's going to be very difficult for them to do. This is what I'm saying. Okay. Not that they shouldn't try. This is the only option I think open to them, other than simply saying, we're all going to live in splendid poverty and be intellectually pure forever after. And then when their computers break, you won't hear from them again. Just like we are. All right. As we head into or get close to our top of the hour break, Gideon wants to know if we're getting a new computer. Yes, we are doing that, and we have that handled. No need for all of you to panic, though. Certainly, if you want to sign up for more donations, that's absolutely a great idea. We don't have enough to start our own foundation here. But the down payment on getting that new computer was that's a project we've been working on since March, when we had the total crash of the laptop that still runs the show, and there was terrific response from everybody, and the money is now there to handle getting the new computer. The ongoing I guess what we would call life support for the show is still an issue. So there's always room for more donations. I never want to discourage that. And there's always room for paying Scott Anderson more. That would be fantastic. He does much more than he gets credit and or pay from. And we will build from there. Anyway, so no discouraging of donations there. And I did get your email, Gideon, and I'll have to deal with that after the larger show. The larger issue here is one, that it's almost the top of the hour and we'll have to stop for a break shortly, and two, that there's much, much more to come. There are many more articles that have nothing to do with any of that Greg provided us with, that we can clean out of the smoking hulk of Discord and bring to your attention today. That was only one we got to, the ProPublica one on the Red Cross. Let's see. The next big story from out of Harvey, I'll tease before our break. Harvey releases 2 million pounds of pollutants from refineries and other plants in the area. That was, of course, to be expected. It only took a couple of days before most of the floodwaters in Katrina were likewise contaminated. They lucked out for the first couple of days, I think, in Harvey, but by now, a lot of that is going to be overwhelming these systems and leaching these chemicals out. And in fact, there was a big chemical explosion, a chemical plant explosion that we were warned of yesterday. I saw yesterday evening a warning from the CEO of the chemical company in question saying that it had reached the point where it was at that point inevitable that there would be an explosion. They could not contain the chemical reaction that was going to lead to a plant explosion any longer, thanks to the high floodwaters. And that's problematic. And equally problematic is that we have to take our break in just a few seconds, and some of our buttons were stuck and our music wasn't rolling. But we'll be right back after this. Hey, I told you we'd be right back, and so we are. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And, I had a special request to actually identify our friends in Rochester by their call letters, and I keep wondering, every time this comes up, I panic at the last second and say, oh my God, I'm going to misremember WRFZ. That is, in fact, the call letters at 106.3 FM on the radio dial in the Rochester area, but I wanted to at least get that out. I know that they do that at station ID on the radio. That's the whole point of our breaks, of course, with Rochester. But if you are listening on the Rochester station now, what would be the point of asking me to tell you what the call letters and the frequency are, because you would have had that. That's the point of the station identification. What happens, though, is that there are many fans in the Rochester area already listening to the show before we began on WRFZ, whom we thank so very much for bringing us to terrestrial radio once again. But if you were listening to the show, we would tell you that we were on in Rochester, and you probably thought, hey, what a cool thing it would be to turn on my actual radio and hear the show, especially sounding so professional and fantastic with their new station identification breaks. I'd love to do that, but I have no idea where to go to find that. Now, there are a limited number of radio stations in the Rochester area, and it's perhaps possible that you might have discovered which one we were on by using, for instance, DuckDuckGo to do searching on Rochester and radio and Kagro in the morning, but who knows whether any of that would have made it to the search, been picked up by the search spiders of DuckDuckGo, if they even exist. So the simpler solution was to ask, hey, I live in Rochester. I would like to hear which station you're on. Why don't you say the call letters and frequency so I can turn it on? So I went on for that extra amount of time so that you could run to the radio and turn it on and tune it to 106.3. I hope I've got that right. The advice, of course, was to write that down and put it on a sticky note and hang it near the computer so that I would not forget. And I agreed with our correspondent that that would be an excellent idea, and then obviously proceeded not to do that because, I don't know, I had other things to do, like try and fix this. I'm not saying that I'm angry about having this. It was an excellent suggestion. One of many things like it that I have told myself 100 times I need to do. What I really need is a personal assistant to do such things. However, in order to afford such a personal assistant, I would need a lot of donations, which you can make to us through patreon.com. That's really the point of all of that. And of course, to somewhat professionalize the show, by which I mean justify the continuance of the show in the eyes of my wife and family, who look at me cross-eyed every time I say I'd like to take time out, let's say from a family vacation, to record a new show. And they say, why? You don't make nearly enough money to have to do something like that. People who make $100,000 plus a year at their companies likewise hang up the electronics at least once a year and take a break from it, and you don't get anything close to that. And that's true. And that's the purpose of the Patreon account. And it caused me to think once again about the number of people who like the show enough to download it daily, and to make the appeal to them that if you enjoy the show as much as you might enjoy, let's say, a discounted can of Coca-Cola at one of the now outdated and old-fashioned, and good luck to you finding a soda vending machine that will sell you a can of Coca-Cola, or any competing product such as Pepsi-Cola, RC Cola, or anyone else who would like to sponsor the show. And then I would absolutely knuckle under to your monopolist influence. If you could find one that worked for 50 cents, I would ask you please post that on the internet and tell us where you can get such a thing, because I don't see them for anything less than $1 anywhere anymore. But if you like the show as much as an ice-cold Coca-Cola that you enjoyed for 50 cents or less, what about donating that 50 cents for each of the fantastic episodes of the show that we bring you, and then doing some math and figuring out how much that would cost per month to support the show. And if the 3,000 to 4,000 of you who are enjoying the show enough to download it every day from Libsyn, and that's not even counting however many of you are downloading it from elsewhere, if you like the show 50 cents and you sent the 50 cents our way, we would be rolling in dough. I could employ Scott like nearly full time. My family would never look cross-eyed at me again. Well, for that, I mean, there's always the dad jokes. Please donate to our cause for eliminating dad jokes. That should do it. The rest of you will probably be moved to tears and grabbing for your wallet. If you knew the suffering I inflicted on my children with my dad jokes, you'd be there in a second. But there could be a there could be a studio, there could be fabulous equipment and people who would make sure that things ran, and that if it didn't run, because, people are fallible, we could yell at those people. And they would have to, this would be great. We would be a boss. There would be people who would have to sit there and listen to our complaints in exchange for money. That's the business world. As near as I can make out, that's what people do all day, where they dress up in ties and skirts and such things, and they yell at each other, and then they exchange money. So, to the extent we'd like to be a part of that, please make that happen. One of these days I'm going to actually script out something serious. Scott even offered to do that with me. Scott, we got to work on that. Script out something that's serious, just a simple, easy reminder. We have this donation program. We're a worthy cause. Go for it. Yes, help the people in Houston first. Yes, help elect your local politicians second. And then us. And then we won't be so awkward about doing it. And the money will flow and all good things will come from it until we take over the New America Foundation and force them to do our work for us. And that would be a great thing. Honestly, I won't turn away from that. Okay. So, back to the serious news. I mentioned to you that we were absolutely, horrified to hear yesterday that there was an explosion that occurred. We were being warned about this explosion. The CEO of the plant in question let us know via, I heard about it via social media yesterday, that there was nothing they could do to stop the explosion at a Crosby chemical plant. The Houston Chronicle has the report of the explosions and reports thus: a fire broke out at the Arkema plant in Crosby early Thursday following chemical explosions overnight that sent plumes of black smoke into the air. Of course, contained in those plumes of black smoke would be the remnants of the chemicals involved in all of that. You don't have to be a chemist to know that one. Arkema officials warned that more explosions could be expected because there are 8 additional containers of the same product at the plant, which is 25 miles northeast of downtown Houston. Nearby residents should stay inside, turn off their air conditioning, that'll be fun, and close their windows and doors. You shouldn't be here, but if you haven't left, shelter in place, Arkema spokesman Jeff Carr said. That's our advice. Of course, an issue fraught with political and socioeconomic peril, discussing whether or not people should be here or shouldn't be here. Nobody should have to have stayed, but many people did have to stay for reasons of economics. And then, of course, yes, there were some people who chose, for whatever reason, to stay and protect their property, and that's sort of a different class involved there. But what an interesting set of instructions. And note here, by the way, it's all the chemicals. What are the chemicals? What is being stored near my house? What is now floating in the air? What might come through into my home and damage my health, the health of my children and animal companions and whoever else might be sheltering in my place if I commit the crime of turning on my air conditioner in Texas in August? I don't know. And will they say? I don't think they will. I think the one thing that we learned from the West Texas chemical plant explosion and didn't learn anything more from since is that in Texas, they don't have to tell you. And I gather that the fact that it's not in the top of the article here means that we're not likely to find out anytime soon either, until people start analyzing what's coming through their air conditioners, at which point they'll probably make public what their findings are, if any of them are chemists, and then be sued for infringement of the company's trade secrets for telling people what they were breathing. Anyway, Crosby officials had been bracing for days for explosions at the Arkema plant, where floodwaters knocked out power and generators needed to keep chemicals stored at the facility cool. That sounds like a great emergency plan, by the way. So, what happens if you lose power? Well, we have generators. And what happens if you lose your generators? Well, we wouldn't, because what? Because reasons. Well, why would I lose my generators? Well, let's see. Some of the things that could destroy your generators would include hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, I guess, but we're not prone to those. But gee whiz, the Bayou City, flooding, hurricanes, Texas, Gulf toast, nothing, huh? All right. All employees at the plant had been evacuated already late Tuesday, as were residents from about 300 nearby homes. The Federal Aviation Administration barred flights over the area. The chemicals at risk, organic peroxides, we know only that much, I guess, are stored in 9 18-wheeler box vans with 36,000 pounds each. That does not sound like a super stable storage situation, does it? Arkema initially reported 2 of the vans exploded, but Assistant Chief Bob Royal with the Harris County Fire Marshal clarified Wednesday morning that there were multiple explosions in just one of the vans that held multiple 15-pound cardboard containers of the chemicals inside. You're going to want to put all your volatile chemicals in cardboard containers, right? I don't know. I mean, I guess if they're in metal containers, then you have shrapnel. Here you just have wet cardboard, wet with organic peroxides to be sure, but all right. At least it doesn't have sharp edges. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Somewhere, somebody, I guess, figured out that should be the protocol. And I mean, it may just be, well, why is that protocol? Is it safer? No, it's just cheap and we're doing this in Texas, so who gives a damn? Oh, okay. Well, that could be something. And of course, just to bring everything, our themes into it, the MBA involved in the situation would say, well, up until there's an explosion, we're going to save lots of money. Can I have a cut of that money as a bonus for having advised us to move to cardboard boxes to contain our dangerous chemicals? Yes, you can. And if we're ever sued because they explode in an easily foreseeable natural disaster, will you be clawing that bonus back? Oh, no, we don't. Please, we don't claw back bonuses. Okay. Well, then we're safe. In that case, go to cardboard. I'm sure there's a better reason than just that. Wink. 8 of the vans had lost power by Wednesday morning, Carr said. 3 of them were no longer cooling, but Carr said, we're going to lose them all. There you have it. The Harris County Fire Marshal is not monitoring any other chemical plants in the area, Royal said. Why? Not sure. Maybe there's no foreseeable need for doing it, but it doesn't sound good. Just after 8 a.m. on Thursday, Francis Bro, a family friend of a couple who live within the evacuation area, showed up at the neighborhood. She had called her friends, both of whom are in their 70s, and hadn't heard back, Bro said. I keep trying to call them and I can't reach them. The pair, Leo and LaJane Opelia, messaged her last night saying they are going to stay and ride it out, Bro added, and if they didn't make it, they loved us. Yow. Citing safety concerns, deputies didn't allow Bro in the neighborhood. You know how older people are, she said. They just don't want to leave their place, and sometimes they just can't. The explosions started about 1 a.m., causing flames and 40 feet of gray smoke that later turned black, Royal said. Arkema has not been characterizing the combustions as explosions, calling it an overpressurization that was followed by a fire. I don't mean to... Can't laugh at the situation, ladies and gentlemen. So please stop. But, I mean, what? Is that like Sarah Huckabee Sanders coming out? Now, you're mischaracterizing it. It wasn't an explosion. It was an overpressurization followed by a fire. Oh. I mean, isn't that really the definition? The fire doesn't have to be a part of the definition. That's just an added bonus. But, I mean, I don't know. We got scientists out there. You tell me what an overpressurization means. I mean, it's not necessarily an explosion because you could vent the overpressure, I guess. They just didn't. And then the container, it's overpressurization followed by a violent rupture of the containment system and, just for added kicks, a fire because what we were containing is, well, flammable. Although, honestly, if you look at the dictionary definition, I think you're actually supposed to say inflammable, which is amazing. Terrible word. We all go with flammable. We overrule the dictionary on that one. Does anyone know if I happen to be right about that? I recall that from like a middle school discussion of language and language weirdness, that actually things that are prone to catch fire are inflammable, which I guess really means you can inflame them easily. But I don't know. Maybe it should have been inflammable. Anyway, maybe I'm just imagining things. There are more important things than which word we use. The damn place is blowing up. Stick to the subject, all right? Within 2 hours of the explosions, quote unquote, I guess. I missed one part. Right after he said that they wouldn't characterize things as explosions. He says, they will burn with intensity until the fuel is consumed, and then they will die down, Royal said. That also qualifies for a duh, thank you. I already knew that, right along with parts of the ProPublica article about donating to charities. Yeah, that's what uncontrolled flame does. It burns with a certain intensity until the fuel is consumed, and then it dies down because the fuel's consumed. Ugh. Within 2 hours of the explosions, which are really just overpressurization followed by violent rupture and flame, sheriff's deputies were dispatched to block off roads in the area, and a stream of fire trucks headed to the scene. Highway 90 was blocked in both directions at Crosby Eastgate, according to Houston's TransStar traffic maps. The plant sits just 1,000 feet or so from the highway. If only they could squirt water 1,000 feet away, they'd be in good shape. But where do they get so much water? I wonder. Can you put the other end of a hose, instead of sticking it in a fire hydrant, can you just drop it in flood water and run the pumps and try to, I mean, it might not be a good idea, but could you? It might damage the equipment, I guess. That's probably not a great idea. Don't do it if you know what you're talking about. A total of 15 deputies with the Harris County Sheriff's Office were taken to the hospital after inhaling the fumes and getting smoke in their eyes. At least 9 of them drove themselves as a precaution. That doesn't sound very cautious. I was going to say precautious. That's Joel Osteen's word. We were trying to be precautious. That's not a real use of the word, I don't think. Anyway, if you worry about inhaling the fumes and getting smoke in your eyes, that's something you should legitimately be worried about. And some people were hurt and they had to go to the hospital. Others, as a precaution, they should have gone to the hospital. True. Driving themselves to the hospital is not really a very good precaution. I'm sure it worked out just fine. But if you suspect that you might at some point become overwhelmed by the fumes, take ill, from the fumes or have them affect your vision, driving yourselves to the hospital doesn't count as not a very wise precaution. Going to the hospital, wise precaution. Driving yourself when you think you might become impaired, bad precaution. But okay, no differentiation here made by Jason Spencer, a spokesman for the Harris County Sheriff's Office. What can you do? Not a lot of Harvard grads working as spokesman for the Harris County Sheriff's Office, I would guess. This one, anyway, isn't. Yes, Michael Musson has checked the dictionary, the actual definition of inflammable. It leads to a whole article at dictionary.com. Why do flammable and inflammable mean the same thing? Is that right? Do they mean the same thing, or are we just take flammable to mean what inflammable was supposed to mean? Well, I guess we could read the article, but that seems like something you should do on your own time. I will include it with our roundup. You got to learn something today, right? Well, one thing you learned is it's not an explosion, it's just an overpressurization. Spencer said the deputies had been dispatched to keep people from getting too close to the plant. That's a good idea. Of course, those people that were dispatched to keep people from getting too close to the plant got too close to the plant. But that's the nature of the job. An injured deputy had respiratory problems after driving through a plume of smoke. Wow, just driving through. However, the sheriff's office tweeted that Arkema said the smoke the deputies inhaled was a non-toxic irritant. Okay. Is that... Now we get into another definitional problem. Is there such a thing as a non-toxic irritant? I mean, I guess it doesn't necessarily make it a toxic substance just because it's an irritant, but I don't know. To me, I'm most familiar with toxicity because it is an irritant and some varying levels of irritancy, I guess, right up to it'll kill you. Anyway, by 7:15 a.m., 8 of the deputies had been released, the sheriff's office tweeted. 7 were still being evaluated. What we were told is that the fumes from this chemical were not life-threatening, Spencer said. I don't think any of our deputies are in a life-threatening situation. Just a little toxic, I guess. Spencer added all the information the sheriff's office had about the toxicity of the chemical was from Arkema, and they're not likely to want you to know about tremendous toxic problems that they might be storing nearby. That's an issue. And surely the Open Markets Foundation folks at the New America Foundation would have recognized that well ahead of time. Yes? Gonzalez said nearby residents should shelter in place at home. We got that already. He said authorities would tell local residents if a wider evacuation zone was needed. Gonzalez arrived on the scene Thursday morning. A spokesman for the county fire marshal's office warned that it's not clear whether all residents had followed the evacuation order given for the area within 1.5 miles of the plant. Harris County Fire Marshal spokeswoman Rachel Moreno said the office heard that a woman may still be in the evacuation zone, though that was not confirmed. Carr, the company spokesman, said he didn't know if all residents had been evacuated. The National Weather Service reported that winds in the area were moving to the east at 4 to 9 miles per hour as of 4:30 a.m., which means that there will be movement of the plume, but they don't seem to say anything about that. At least one family not far outside the 1.5 mile zone was left worried. But homes 2 miles away are safe? Questioned Alicia Garcia, who had recently returned to the family's home about 4 miles away after evacuating Sunday because of flooding. At least she sounds appropriately concerned. I would recommend, you should probably think about leaving again, particularly if there's wind headed in your direction. The Arkema facility was among the Houston area sites with the highest potential for harm in an incident, according to a 2016 analysis by the O'Connor Process Safety Center and the Houston Chronicle. See, they were preparing in between disasters, just like ProPublica said you should. Nobody did anything about it, but they studied it. And interesting, again, to note, who's studying whether the citizens of the area are at risk? The O'Connor Process Safety Center, which I'm sure is a valuable institution, but doesn't sound like the state of Texas or Harris County. Also in on the study, the Houston Chronicle. And again, I'm glad they did, but, in Texas, they understand. The government isn't involved in this thing. The rest of us say, why not? Why do you keep doing this to yourself? Anyway, their analysis factored risks based on the amount and type of dangerous chemicals on site and their proximity to the public. The volatile chemicals involved in the reaction are organic peroxides, according to the company, which can become flammable at warm temperatures. At a press conference Wednesday, Rich Rowe, Arkema's CEO, said that if the volatile organic peroxides stored at the plant get too warm, some sort of explosion will happen, at which point, well, the sort that involves giant plumes of smoke and toxic chemicals and fire and overpressurization, it should be pointed out. The spokesman didn't interrupt at that point and say, not explosions, don't say explosions. But listen to this. Rich Rowe says, there's no way to prevent an explosion or fire. None. It can't be done. Once power's out, there's an explosion. But feel free to build a house next to this plant or a plant next to this house, whichever the case may be. Greg was mentioning the other day about, and Joan also following up on the same remarks. There's a lot of man-made disaster here, and a lot of it has to do with sort of what's beginning to sound like the willy-nilly development in the Houston area. We don't like regulations. And if somebody wants to build a very cheap house next to a chemical plant at which there's no way to prevent an explosion or fire, well then, the open market says they ought to do it, I guess. Anyway, what else can you say about this? I'm lingering on this story when there's much more to reflect on because there's so much going on in this. These disasters upon disasters. And I don't know. Well, it's another great argument for government intervention, but of course, that would never be studied. And if you dared to say, maybe there ought to be a law, there ought to be a law. That's an old fashioned saying. It's very Norman Rockwell. Why, there ought to be a law about that. For instance, building homes next to chemical plants at which there's no way to prevent an explosion or fire in the event of a natural disaster, which happens all the time. But in Texas, they say, why, that's government overregulation. Some homes, wouldn't be affordable to lower income folks unless they were cheaper because they're built in riskier or less desirable places. And I guess that's true to an extent. But that's, of course, not the only housing option there is in the world. But we decided to favor home ownership at some point versus, other styles of occupancy. And, of course, developers who make a tremendous amount of money turning those houses around were mostly interested in having the least amount of regulation possible. Like, don't get in our way or mandate that we tell people who are about to buy the houses for very little money that they're living next to a chemical plant at which there's no way to prevent an explosion or fire. Because if you do, we'll lose the investment that we put into building this house here in the hopes that somebody would be willing to assume the risk for a very low price on a house. Whereas I think people like the Garcias, for instance, who live 2 miles away, very clearly are worried about such things and would have been interested in finding that out probably earlier. All right. Well, let's see. Is there really anything else that we can add to this? Probably not before our next break, of course. Rowe goes on, though, to downplay any long-term impact or any toxic inhalation hazards from a fire or explosion at the plant, saying he was not aware of anything the public should be concerned about, but I have a feeling he's got a very different definition about that than other people. So he does go on to say that he had redundant contingency plans in place, but not very good ones, I guess, because there's just no way to prevent an explosion or fire, even if it's not the sort of explosion you typically characterize as an explosion, but merely overpressurization followed by rupture and fire. We'll be back after this overpressurization next. We are back from the latest overpressurization, followed by Violent Rupture and Flame here on the show. Yes, back with the Kagro in the Morning show. And right here on Netroots Radio, I think everything's working, right? Okay, we got thumbs up, everything's okay. We're back in. Yes, okay. We've been back. Did we miss the cue on the music on that one? Hope not. Hope that didn't interrupt things for you. All right. Well, look, it's time, I think, to move on from the explosion, or the latest explosion in Houston. But I do have to, there's like one paragraph left, which is almost, I guess, too amazing to drop at this point. A statement on the company's website from Wednesday says, at Crosby, we prepared for what we recognized could be a worst-case scenario. We had redundant contingency plans in place. Right now, we have an unprecedented 6 feet of water at the plant. We have lost primary power and 2 sources of emergency backup power. As a result, we have lost critical refrigeration of the materials on site that could now explode and cause a subsequent intense fire. The high water and lack of power leave us with no way to prevent it. Now, I'll just finish it. He added that the company is bringing air quality monitoring equipment to the site Thursday morning. This site has an outstanding individual safety record, and they're determined not to screw it up today, he said. Should I talk more? I mean, is there more to say? We're determined we have a great safety record. We're determined not to screw it up today. Why? Has something happened today? Beyond overpressurization, violent rupture of the containment system, and a fireball and plume of toxic smoke. But beyond that, we're not going to screw it up. How so? Well, for instance, we're going to monitor the air for toxicity. Okay. Well, that I think would be the least we could ask of you. Tell us, is the air toxic? Answer, I don't know. We're not going to get the air monitoring equipment here until Thursday morning. Now, it's Thursday morning now, of course, so maybe they've got it, but that doesn't really seem like it was really all that redundant, the contingency plan. So let me get it straight. The contingency plan is we use electricity to cool our chemicals. If, for some reason, we were to lose electricity, we have generators that will produce electricity to cool the chemicals. Well, what happens if, for instance, where are your generators? They're over here on the ground. Okay, so what sorts of things could interrupt the flow of power from a generator that sits on the ground? Just spitballing here. You're 35 feet above sea level and situated on the Gulf Coast, the most hurricane-prone coast. Well, maybe not. I don't know. The East Coast might be more hurricane-prone, but come on. The worst ones are the ones that come into the Gulf and then just sit there and dump rain on you. Really? Honestly, there's no, I don't know what you do. 6 feet of water is a lot. That's true. And maybe they built their generators on a platform inside of a watertight four-walled compartment, but with no top because they generate heat. They got to be able to vent. And 4 feet of water, 5 feet of water can be kept out. The generators can be kept dry in 5 feet of standing water, but the 6th foot of standing water overtops the containment and floods the generators and takes them out. Maybe that's it. But that I would prefer maybe that the more description be given of that than, for instance, hemming and hawing over whether overpressurization plus violent rupture of a containment system followed by a fireball and a plume of toxic smoke ought or ought not to be characterized as an explosion. But that's just me. Call it media criticism. And really, aren't there more important things in the wake of the Houston disaster than media criticism? Yes, sure, of course there are. What sorts of things are more important? Well, the other stories we haven't taken a look at, and we really got to turn our eyes away from the rolling disasters there and look at the rolling disaster in the White House that I mentioned at the top of the show. Politico has probably the biggest Russia-Trump news of the day. Mueller teams up with New York Attorney General in Manafort probe. The cooperation is the latest sign that the investigation into Trump's former campaign chairman is intensifying. That's Josh Dawsey's take in Politico, and that campaign chairman would be Paul Manafort. Here's the story. Special counsel Robert Mueller's team is working with New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman on its investigation into Paul Manafort and his financial transactions. According to several people familiar with the matter, the cooperation is the latest indication that the federal probe, and that's important, federal probe, into President Donald Trump's former campaign manager and other things is intensifying. It could also potentially provide Mueller with an additional leverage point to get Manafort to cooperate in the larger investigation into Trump's campaign, as Trump does not have pardon power over state crimes. That's the big nut to take away from this one. Although, honestly, if you're going to take a big nut away from this one, let me suggest Donald Trump is a huge nut, and you should absolutely take him away. Please do. He may take himself away in all this. I don't know how seriously we're supposed to take this, but apparently Eric Trump was on television yesterday insisting that, that his dad's coping skills, I guess, were the greatest ever and huge. And thank God that they were, because otherwise he would be on the brink of suicide from all the criticism. I have a hard time imagining Donald Trump getting to that point, but who knows? Maybe. I mean, he's clearly mentally disturbed in some way, and maybe he's manic and he actually gets into funks and considers killing himself in the middle of all these things. I have a hard time believing it. What if we're all going to get shamed in the end in this? He's self-medicating with ridiculous, megalomaniacal, egotistical, narcissistic self-praise to keep himself from falling into a suicidal funk. And now we're all going to feel bad about this. Is that what's going to happen in the end of this? We're such liberals. It's crazy. Okay. I don't know. He's inflicting enough damage, and I don't think we have to feel that bad about it. And also, if you know that about yourself, you could not run for president. But that was it, right? I'm going to kill myself. It's all over. I can't take it anymore. Wait a minute. There is one way to lift myself out of it. If the people of the United States were to approve of me to the extent that they were to elect me president of the United States, that would do it. I would come out of my funk, Okay, well, maybe therapy instead, right? Because, at what point do we stop this thing? You know what would really make me feel great? Nuclear holocaust. If I could burn other people to a crisp instantaneously around the globe, that would really cheer me up. Well, we can't allow that, Mr. President. I'm sorry. We're going to have to step in on this one. Boy, that turned dark fast. Well, maybe not. I started out by discussing suicide. So it was dark from the beginning. Back to Robert Mueller, which is supposed to be the lighthearted bit here. The two teams have shared evidence and talked frequently in recent weeks about a potential case anyway. These people, I guess those are the anonymous sources. One of the people familiar with progress on the case said both Mueller's and Schneiderman's teams have collected evidence on financial crimes, including potential money laundering. No surprise there. No decision has been made on whether or where to file charges. Nothing is imminent, said one of the people familiar with the case. Manafort has not been accused of any wrongdoing. And yes, he has, not by them in a formal sense, and has previously denied it. A spokesman for Manafort did not return phone calls seeking comment. A representative from Mueller's office declined to comment, as did the New York Attorney General's office. People close to Manafort say the team has pressured him by approaching family members and former business partners. A number of other firms and people who have worked with him have received subpoenas. Federal agents also conducted an early morning raid at Manafort's home in late July, seizing documents and other items. Manafort did not resist the search, his spokesman, Jason Maloney, said at the time of the raid. Remember, Jason, you're a Maloney. State and federal prosecutors believe the prospect of a presidential pardon could affect whether Manafort decides to cooperate with investigators in the federal Trump investigation, said one of the people familiar with the matter. While Trump has not signaled any public intention to pardon Manafort or anyone else involved in the Russia investigations, the president has privately discussed his pardon powers with his advisors. Mueller's team, and you know that that's what they were talking about too, because all of his advisors on pardon powers say they were unconsulted. They were left unconsulted in the Arpaio pardon. So he must have been conferring with them about something else. And really, what else could possibly be occupying his attention? So it's obvious that he's talked to them about pardons in the Russia context. Mueller's team has been looking into Manafort's lobbying work and financial transactions, including real estate deals in New York. Schneiderman has a contentious history with Trump. The president has mocked him relentlessly on social media and TV, denouncing him as a hack and a lightweight. The Attorney General won a $25 million settlement last November after a lengthy investigation into allegedly fraudulent practices at Trump University. The president said he settled just to have the matter behind him, though his previous mantra was never to settle cases. Although he does all the time. The New York prosecutor's office is also looking into some of Trump's business transactions and could potentially share those records with Mueller's team. One of these people said those inquiries are in the preliminary stage. So it should be pointed out here, by the way, that I guess it wouldn't be incorrect to say that Louise Mensch and Claude Taylor and those guys have been saying that there's some kind of cooperation between Mueller's team and the Schneiderman team for some time. And I guess that's true. The latest round of information that they had been circulating, what were false or invented rumors, had to do with investigation into, for instance, his now defunct modeling agency on sex trafficking charges. But I think that they might actually have been one of the early sources, though they weren't necessarily trustworthy sources, of information about possible cooperation between these two teams. But I think I believed that when I read it because it made a certain amount of sense, as opposed to say, I also think sex trafficking charges eventually will make sense too. I have to admit that I think that's possible. Whereas, for instance, the marshal of the Supreme Court arresting people on their way to airports to abscond with stolen funds seems still pretty unbelievable, because that's just not something that happens, and it was garbage to begin with. But these things, I mean, I don't know. If Claude Taylor or Louise Mensch tells me something that's actually believable, I will report it with a grain of salt and say I could believe it. I could see if this comes to fruition that it made sense all along. But, I would need more sources than just Louise Mensch or Claude Taylor or anybody else for that matter. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. Maybe they're not as completely out of it as the latest story made them seem. But of course, I don't know, Mensch with that story about the Supreme Court marshal thing was just like, I don't know where that came from. That's just nuts. Why wouldn't we reach that conclusion then? I don't know. Not enough people were reading about it. There's more information that I have tucked away in pocket that requires an update. This time again from Charlottesville. After all of our analysis of the structure of government in Charlottesville and the weak mayor / city manager model, there is a new development. This one reported by the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Signer, the mayor, is now to have a diminished mayoral role after grilling by councilors behind closed doors. Reports Chris Suarez, actually, of the Daily Progress, another local Central Virginia paper. This one being run, though, the story being run in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, where I picked it up. Let me give you the latest on that one, if they'll allow me to scroll any further. For some reason, the intensity of the data coming through from the Richmond Times-Dispatch prevents me from scrolling down to the story, and instead presents me with the spinning pinwheel of death, which is always good news because death is involved. Are there other stories I can refer to? Here we go. Kind of cleared it up. The mayor of Charlottesville will remain in his position for at least another 4 months, but his role will be diminished. In a hastily prepared news conference that followed a 3-hour meeting behind closed doors Wednesday, Mayor Mike Signer apologized to his fellow members of the Charlottesville City Council for his recent actions, including a lengthy Facebook post that, quote, impugned the reputations.
Mayor Mike Signer
some auto-playing video. That's also helpful on the top of the problems we have. including a lengthy Facebook post that impugned the reputations of city manager Maurice Jones and police chief Al Thomas. So I guess he doesn't think those accusations were warranted any longer. We were wondering the other day, though, why we weren't hearing anything about Maurice Jones, including his name. But now you're prepared. As a Kagro in the Morning listener, you knew who we were talking about when his name came up in this report. Also, it seems to hint in here, and I don't have any more information on it. Maybe this article discusses some of it. But I thought that was an interesting way of putting things, that Mayor Signer apologized to his fellow members of the Charlottesville City Council. I guess he's a member of the council, either by virtue of his elected position as mayor, or maybe it's one of those towns that rotates the mayorship through the then seated city council. And interesting that they say that he'll keep his job for at least 4 more months. Is it because there's another election, or has it become somebody else's turn in 4 months? I'm not sure. Anyway, more to the point, Signer says, in the deeply troubling and traumatizing recent weeks, I have taken several actions as mayor and made several communications that have been inconsistent with the collaboration required by our system of governance and that overstepped the bounds of my role as mayor, for which I apologize to my colleagues and the people of Charlottesville. Going forward, I am committed to working with my colleagues on city council to putting the needs of the city and our community first. I am looking forward to working for consensus and to forge unity. The apology follows a series of closed-door meetings this month surrounding actions considered and taken by the council before and after a white nationalist rally in the city on August 12th. As city residents and people throughout the nation have continued to mourn 3 people who died on the day of the rally, a female counter-protester who was rammed by a car, and in a separate incident, 2 police officers in a helicopter crash, the community's elected officials have reeled from accusations that they were responsible for the tragedies. Questions about Signer's leadership came to attention after he called a closed meeting last week. Moments before the meeting started, he issued a seemingly critical Facebook statement that mentioned Jones and Thomas, leading to speculation that the police chief and city manager were in danger of being fired. A leaked memo about the meeting, which was written by Signer with the input of other councilors, alleged that the councilors were concerned by the lack of answers being provided by the city. The city. Who? City manager? The cops? Who? Asserting a number of claims as facts, it seemed Jones was responsible for the delay in responses to the public and for allegedly failing to communicate and effectively plan for the rally in the weeks before it. Jones responded to the memo on Saturday and alleged that the mayor had threatened to fire him on 2 separate occasions on August 12th. Signer's statements, as well as Jones's response to them, revealed that the mayor was barred from entering a police command center where Jones and Thomas were overseeing operations that day with other local and state officials. Signer has said best practices for municipalities require that elected officials like him must observe police operations in such situations. Sounds like it's a decent argument. In Charlottesville's system of government, however, the mayor is elected every 2 years by the 5-member city council. And the city manager is in charge of all municipal operations. On Wednesday, Councilor Kathy Galvin said Signer was not asked to resign. Instead, Signer will be surrendering some of his assumed autonomy and commit to 4 protocols. And that's put in quotations here, 4 protocols. And here are those protocols. With the exception of meeting with Jones for regular check-ins, he will meet with senior city staff only when another councilor is present. Signer will, quote, be more mindful of the time of the council clerk and assistant clerk, unquote. That's odd. He will work with council colleagues to, quote, ensure that council meetings going forward reflect shared leadership, and he will not make public announcements as mayor without working with the other councilors and the city manager beforehand, ensuring their consent. Tight reins. Signer was unanimously elected mayor in January of 2016 at his first meeting as a city councilor and only a few weeks after being elected to office. The primary role of the mayor in the city's system of governments is to preside over council meetings. Why did they make a brand new member of council their president, essentially? I don't know. I guess it sounds like my best guess is it's a crappy job and you can't do anything and it's just extra work for no good reason. So they made somebody else do it, like putting freshman senators in the chair as president pro tem to sit there and listen to speeches drone on. Immediately following Signer's comments, Councilor Kristen Sakos read a statement on behalf of the council. She also announced that the city is launching a new webpage to share information about a series of topics affecting our community. Thanks for that information. She said the new page, charlottesville.org/community/info-hub-9160, just for ease of use, will be a step toward uniting the community following the recent tragic events. We all faced a horrible tragedy in Charlottesville, a city we all love, Zakos said. We face this challenge as a city, as leaders within it, and as individuals. We still face challenges. We acknowledge that people in our community continue to hurt and that we have a long road ahead to address the issue of equity. We have recommitted to one another to work as a leadership team, learning from the events of the day, discovering ways to have a more constructive community dialogue moving forward, and eventually reemerging as a stronger city. The councilors declined to answer questions at the end of the news conference. Several people who came to City Hall on Wednesday to see what might unfold after the closed session said they are still skeptical of the city's elected leaders. Jolene Schmidt, a local leader for followers of the Black Lives Matter movement, says she believes Signer may have been the source of the leaked memo last week. It's not leadership, she said. He needs to specify what he did. When my kids do things wrong and they're supposed to apologize, I tell them they have to be specific. What exactly are you sorry for? What did you do wrong? That's part of being responsible and turning a corner. Charlottesville area resident Mason Pickett said he thinks Signer may have harmed his reputation and political aspirations by attempting to shift responsibility toward other officials. I think he should be embarrassed, Pickett said, but I don't think he did anything he should be expelled for. He didn't get into the command center and make some sort of crazy call. Well, no, he didn't. I don't know. I mean, was he wrong? Was he shifting responsibility to people where it didn't belong? Because apparently the actual structure of the government there is that the city manager and police chief handle those things, but the media was calling him. But although maybe he was calling the media, I don't really know. But it doesn't change the fact that the city manager is really supposed to be the one responsible for these things. I don't know how much shifting was really going on. All right, let's see. We'll catch up on other comments that have come in before wrapping up the show. Michael Musson is talking, I guess, about all of the various things we were talking about. First on the pardons. Trump privately discussed a pardon, but Jared and Ivanka were privately disgusted by one. Okay. That's probably true, even though it's a joke. And what about the chemicals that, we were talking about down in Houston? Michael also said apparently they can inert the peroxide at the cost of losing the sale of the inventory, but I guess they gambled. Oh, puts a different spin on things, doesn't it? Companies have the ability to quench the organic peroxides, so it's no longer dangerous. That's according to a report on, is that a different report from the Houston Chronicle? But I guess they either opted not to do that or waited too long, and the crew had to evacuate before they could do it. But I mean, why wouldn't the last thing out the door, like normally, last one out the door, turn out the lights. Last one out the door, neutralize the chemicals that would otherwise inevitably overpressurize, rupture their containers, and produce a fireball and toxic plumes of smoke, but not explode. This is, he's pointing to an article from yesterday. Arkema chemical plant faces explosion risk after Harvey floodwaters. Let me just take a quick look at that one, because that's pretty amazing. Wow. This is a totally different sort of, this was datelined, August 29th. So that's not yesterday. That's, Tuesday. Floodwaters could trigger an explosion at the plant. Late Monday night, the facility lost power from both its primary supply and its backup generators due to flooding. Employees moved highly volatile organic peroxides into backup containers to keep them cool. And if this class of chemicals gets too hot, it can cause fires or explosions. At this time, while we do not believe there is any imminent danger, the potential for a chemical reaction leading to a fire and or explosion within the site confines is real, Arkema spokeswoman Janet Smith said on Tuesday, and it switched from Tuesday to Wednesday to, I don't think there's an explosion danger, to there's literally nothing we can do to stop the imminent, well, not explosion per se, but you get the point. That's pretty amazing. So somewhere in this story, it says that there's something you can do basically to spike the stuff so that it won't explode, but they decided not to do it because they were crossing their fingers hoping the stuff wouldn't explode, and then when the floodwaters receded, they could come back and still sell those chemicals and make money. But instead they decided, well, look, if it explodes, it explodes. We'll just leave it to divine providence. If God wants us to sell the chemicals and Joel Osteen wants us to sell the chemicals, they'll still be here when we get back. If not, then not only will the chemicals not be here when we get back, but maybe the plant won't even be here when we get back. In fact, maybe the neighbors of the plant won't even be here when we get back. And, if you got a problem with that, I guess take it up with God. There's plenty of opportunity to do so. That's pretty amazing. I can't believe that those guys are going to walk free. But that's Texas. I don't know. I guess they chose that outcome. All right. Well, that's some bad news. Other bad news, it's time to end the show, or very nearly. But the good news is we can hand things over to the guys on the after show, and they can catch up on the latest news while we were getting preoccupied with ridiculousness like things that rupture their containers because of overpressurization aren't explosions. The world we live in, my goodness. Anyway, tomorrow, being Friday, would be a good time to perhaps dive into a collection of articles that I have waiting in the wings about Twitter bots and the weirdo Twitter army that are harassing us all and driving us all insane. Why are they doing it? How are they doing it? How can you recognize when it's being done? All of that kind of information, something we can share with you tomorrow, heading into the weekend, to make you smarter as the weekend approaches. Plus, of course, a number of other weird stories, like the fact that for some reason Felix Sater owns a raft of very weirdly named and highly censorable names of websites that he used to attack rivals and enemies online. It's a very odd collection of things, but another indication that, for instance, that at least Felix Sater is familiar with online information warfare, and I guess that's to be expected since he is one of a cast of characters in the whole Trump-Russia drama. It sounds like they all have knowledge of that. And, of course, we also found out more about our Akhmetshin and his being called before the investigative committees in the Congress. Might be interesting to catch up on what he may have spilled. In the meantime, if you are staying tuned, and you ought to be staying tuned to Netroots Radio all day long, it's Thursday, and that means it's Thank God It's Joe Vidi version of the after show, and here's what they've got on tap for you. Calling scientific evaluations and observations attempts to politicize Superstorm Harvey. The Trump team attacks scientists for doing their job. There's much more, of course, and we'll squeeze as much of it as we can in after this closing message.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
What else have they got? A 29-year-old local man is arrested for starting the Ponderosa fire in Northern California, and Colbert, Oklahoma, we're going to guess it's Colbert, not Colbert, rejects its police chief's resignation after the Southern Poverty Law Center exposed him as a leader in a white supremacist movement. Amazing. All coming up next.